I love inviting my teams going, here's an impossible challenge I have. And I honestly don't know what to do, but I know and I trust you all know the details far better than I do. And there's things I know. And again, I think sometimes people are afraid, well, if we just do this, it's going to be utter chaos and ruin and people are going to usurp our authority. And it's like, no, they won't. They'll respect you even more because they'll respect the value you bring to the conversation.
This is Humble Mind, and it's good to be back. Welcome to 2025. We are a social learning community that shares a passion for connection, conversation, and learning about the future. And this is our podcast. Check out more about what we do at join.humblemind.co for more. Now, there's a lot of talk about the future, whether it's talking about automation, AI, the ever-accelerating pace of change. But what happens when we rush forward with all this change without asking if the road that we're on leads anywhere worth going in the first place? Well, today we're joined by someone who believes that progress without purpose is a dangerous game, and that breaking free from the mindsets that don't serve us anymore is really the only step forward. So I'm very pleased to have with us on the podcast today Christopher Lind. He's an executive advisor, he's a LinkedIn top voice, and a leader who's been helping organizations around the world transform how they think about putting people at the center of innovation. You can find him on LinkedIn, on Substack as well. And I've always really admired his voice when it comes to how he continually challenges us to rethink what it means to live and to lead in a technology-driven world. And still, why curiosity and creativity are some of the most valuable skills that we can have. And also how some of the decisions that we're making, or perhaps not making today, will be something that ripples through the generations. Chris, so good to have you with us. Welcome to the Humble Mind podcast.
Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to it. I was looking forward to this one for quite a while. So glad you reached out.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I think you're something of a celebrity amongst our quarters. So it's great to...
That's still a weird thing to be called, but I'll take it, I guess.
Take it. Absolutely. That's what I do. Take it. No, wonderful. There's so much to kind of jump in with because, our original topic was looking at the sort of the outdated industrial mindset and what's changing, what's not changing as well. And so maybe to kind of kick us off with some context setting in the way that you see things, which I always find really refreshing. Maybe you can kind of just detail with us what that sort of industrial era type mindset looks like, where it came from, and why we are here at the moment with the tools and the frameworks that we have right now.
I mean, we're here for a lot of reasons, and I think they're probably multifaceted and more complex than we can probably get into on the whole thing. But I mean, if you really think about what happened with the Industrial Revolution, we kind of made this shift from, a little more independent. We did what we needed for ourselves and our community. And all of a sudden we went, holy crap. Imagine if we could do what I need or my community needs, and we did it times 1,000. Wouldn't that be so great? And what could possibly go wrong? And let's not think about that. Let's just do it and see what happens. And, that took decades, maybe multiple decades for that to kind of get going. And so that's been an interesting journey in and of itself, where people went and suddenly started showing up in factories and just did what they were told and did it in mass, and it just expanded. And, we're seeing some of the pain of that. And we have over the last few decades, as people started to kind of go, what am I really doing? And what really is the value of this? And the value proposition changed tremendously too, because, originally, even though you were doing it en masse, companies cared largely about their people. They cared about the people who contributed to this big machine that was building things for the masses. And over time, companies kind of started forgetting or I would say they've lost their way. And they started going, well, people are just a tool, an asset to feed the machine of whatever it is. And companies got bigger and bigger and bigger and more disconnected from the people that they were with. And then people started going, well, what am I really doing here? I'm showing up and I'm doing all this stuff, but to what end? And is there really ever an end? And so we've been in a bit of an identity crisis, I don't know, for a while. And then along came AI, and we just strapped a rocket ship to the back of this machine that we had. And again, we really haven't taken the time to go, what was working with the system that we had in place and where was it starting to break? And now we've attached a rocket to it thinking, well, this will obviously solve all the world's problems because, I mean, heaven, look at human history. When have we ever just taken off running? And that's never gone poorly. And so I think that's where we are right now is we run a lot of risks of just saying, hey, now, because what took decades before is going to take years, months, maybe weeks in some instances. And I think that's the part that we just have to be really careful because I've got 8 kids and I think a lot about the fact that the decisions we make today, it's not me that's just going to have to suffer the consequences of it. It's my kids, it's my kids' kids, it's, their kids and so on. So,
yeah. As a father of 3 as well, I completely resonate with that. I suppose what also makes it harder is that it's not as if there's 2 black and white clear options, go or no go. It's rather a cloud of sort of uncertainty about how to manage these sort of exponential forces. And there isn't really a clear answer on how to do it. There's a lot of debate, there's a lot of noise, there's a lot of talk about it, but there isn't always kind of the best made case for kind of, yes, we go forward, or no, we don't, let's stay in the Stone Age. I don't know, maybe you're privy to more of that than I am, but it doesn't always feel like the tools with which we can think about these questions are, I don't feel kind of empowered by how to make those decisions. It seems like you've got to really do a lot of your own research, which makes sense, which is fine. But ultimately, the voices you end up listening to will come to some sort of end, or it will come to some kind of like but I kind of need more information now, or it only leads me to another question.
Yeah, it's extremely complicated in that there's definitely a lot of uncharted waters. The specifics of things. I was talking to somebody the other day, and one of the things that we talked about is we don't really have an example where, and depending on your definition of this, people can agree or disagree, but we don't really have an example where a less intelligent species has been led by a more intelligent species, has led a more intelligent species. And that's kind of where we're getting to this point where it's like, well, okay, like AI has the potential to be more intelligent. Now, I don't think it's more wise, and we can get into that whole thing, but all of a sudden something that's smarter, faster, more powerful, we're trying to rein that in, and we're not necessarily thinking about all of that. And you see some of these godfathers of AI going, yeah, well, there were these 5 rules we swore we should never break if we get this far with AI. Well, we kind of broke all those rules in like the first 6 months, and we keep breaking more rules. And so we are a little bit on this train flying down a road going, where are we going with this? And how does this all end? Now, granted, I think some of the comfort that can come with it is where it can feel like, well, we have no idea what to do. It's like, well, there are guiding principles that are not rocket science that go alongside some of this stuff. There are ethical and moral decisions we can be making as we go down this path that, we've known these for millennia. Like we don't need to go, gee, I don't know. Is it a good idea to exploit people for our own gain? I'm not sure. Maybe we should maybe it'll be different this time with AI. It's like, no, we know how this ends. And so I think that's this balancing act of going, and I one of my posts recently was, I think morals and ethics and philosophy are going to be some of the most important things we focus on in the next few days, which that's a flip from the Industrial Revolution, where it was like speed, efficiency, optimizing processes and all this. And it's like, yeah, that's important. But now we're moving into uncharted territory where just because you can do something or you can make it more efficient, doesn't mean you should.
Mm. Yes, I read that piece that you put together. I remember replying to you about it because I loved it. Maybe we can include a link in the show notes. Philosophy and ethics are key to avoiding a dystopian future. It's interesting because there's these sort of competing forces, and some of them are new, like AI, like the rise of some of the kind of the power of the technologies that are in front of us right now to be able to create workflows, to be able to generate pieces of art, to be able to, create a business in 5 minutes, or business plan or something that might have taken, months to do.
Or a guy I read the other day applied to 1,000 jobs overnight. You went to sleep and you thought, like, it's just one of these, what?
Yeah. 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 Incredible. Yeah. So all these things are changing, but at the same time, it's almost as if the software is changing, but so many pieces of the hardware are still the same. And maybe our own hardware, our own, kind of shortcomings as human beings, we're still prey to, needing to sleep, needing to eat, needing to have sex and make babies, needing to do all of these things that kind of make us human. We're still driven by these animalistic desires. And I suppose the law of the jungle still plays a role in how we make sense of the world. And maybe that comes out in the way that we manage capital, in the way that we manage money, in the way that we grow businesses. And so the profit motive is
Right.
always going to be the driving force in what we do, no matter how fancy or no matter how groundbreaking the technology is. So do you think that there's, with that in mind, our own kind of animalistic nature, which is always going to be around until we cease to be humans, maybe that'll happen soon, who knows, versus all of these other forces that we're clearly at a bit of a funk in learning how to manage? Is there a tipping point? Is there a way to make sense of that? Maybe it's ethics. Maybe it's about rediscovering purpose. I'm trying to sort of square that in the way that you might see those sorts of questions.
So I guess this is where you start delving into some of the philosophical waters. And I was talking with somebody the other day where I said, regardless of whether somebody shares my worldview or not, reading the biblical text is an interesting insight into the human condition and some of the things that you talked about of this just human tendency to let greed and pride and, it consumes us. And when we let it doesn't go well. And I think that's where we're at this inflection point right now where we all kind of have to go on this journey. And I think that's a shift. And I think that's why it's uncomfortable for a lot of people, because we've been in an age where it's like, I don't really want to have to think about that. So I'm going to go through my day and I'm going to do my thing. And I'm just going to go to work and my company's going to think about that. And my company's going to take care of that. And now it's like, well, now this just showed up on your doorstep because now this technology is in your hands and you have to make this decision. Because going back to this, I mean, I read an article a few months ago, a kid with Anthropic built a fusion reactor on his desk for $2,000. And so you go, okay, well, suddenly now every single person is faced with this very, very powerful question of, so what are you going to do with this power? And the Peter Parker principle of, gosh, now, of course, I say, with great power comes great responsibility. And so you're like, all of a sudden, things that we've kind of delegated and gone, I don't want to have to think about that. That's not really for me to think about. I'll let somebody else make that decision. Suddenly now everybody's having to go, so what are you going to do?
Yeah.
And how are you making decisions? And what's guiding you? And where is that going to take you? And the consequences are serious. And I think that's where it's, you've got these bigger powers that are having to go through all this. And you can, pontificate on, well, is Google going to rule the world? Is Sam Altman going to dominate this and that? Is Elon Musk going to, eradicate? And it's like, yeah, okay. But at the end of the day, if they're going to, they're going to. And what are you going to do about it? But some of these decisions are like, yeah, but you have the power to choose what you do today. And that decision may have massive implications on the world around you that you might not even be thinking about.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned this because in some of the articles and some of the pieces that you put out, you often talk about kind of thinking beyond the here and now, the
Hmm.
responsibility that we have to consider more than just our own kind of circumstances. And so do you think that there's an appropriate and a viable way of kind of, I'm trying not to use the word police, but of trying to regulate, if you like, or trying to
Mm.
sort of provide guidelines or some sort of
Yeah.
frameworks in place that allows, let's say, this kid who clearly an ingenious kid who's able to, create a fusion reactor on a shoestring budget, that's incredible.
Right.
That's also something
It
that should be
is.
celebrated and rewarded. But at the same time, there's obviously the responsibility to safety and so on. Is there some kind of viable alternative way of regulating or safeguarding that kind of
Yeah.
progress so that we don't strangle the innovation and the clear ingenuity around that, but also not putting anyone's lives at risk or anyone's lives at risk in the future as well? Have you heard a compelling argument aside from what we might just hear as whitewashing and greenwashing, what we should be doing?
Yeah. And I think that's the challenge we face right now is that the answer requires us to actually go against like our own nature because it actually requires us to say we actually need to invite really diverse voices together who have very different perspectives. And we actually need to listen to those diverse voices and say, hey, what am I not thinking about? Because I recognize my experience doesn't tell me the whole picture. And we actually have to work together and say, so how are we going to do this? And our tendency is to go, well, that's really inconvenient. It'd be really easy if everything just went the way I want. Because boy, my life would be a whole lot easier if everything was just the way I want and based on my experience, because that would make things better for me. And it's like, well, that's actually the opposite of what we need. But that's a very challenging thing we have right now because we have a lot of very powerful people with a lot of money and a lot of technology going, gosh, if we could just shut all those people up who keep saying, hey, whoa, but my experience says this isn't going to go well for things. And I think I was talking with somebody the other day where, are we going to get it perfect? No. But is it possible for us to put in some sort of, governance structure that says, how do we rein this back in? I think there is. I think, again, like so many things, it's like, well, what choice are we going to make? Are we going to choose the counterintuitive option that we know is what's best? Or are we going to say, I'm going to do what I want and hope that it turns out okay? And I've seen that movie. I know how it ends. And I think in many ways, I mean, a good example of this, I think everybody's probably seen Oppenheimer. I highly doubt when fission was somebody's mathematical thesis of what would happen if we ripped two atoms apart, there were probably a lot of people that went, oh, imagine the energy we could create and the whatever we could do. And then as they started discovering it, they went, yeah, but it also creates this toxic waste that absolutely destroys everything it comes in contact with. And it takes thousands of years for whatever. And also, it also could wipe humanity off the planet. And unfortunately, it took dropping a bunch of these things for us to finally go, you know what? We need the world to come together and say, mm-mm. And even today, we still have well, it's fine for us to have nukes, but not you have nukes. And so we still haven't quite figured it out, but we have managed to not destroy ourselves. So I think there's a world that we can do it. I just hope we don't have to have another Hiroshima or Nagasaki for the world to kind of go, whoa. But will we?
Yeah.
Jury's still out.
I suppose it's the price of progress, right? Looking back in history, you've got so many of these, and I know that you enjoy looking at historical parallels as well, and seeing how great technological or social changes often come at a sort of a great personal human cost. And I'm wondering if it's kind of written into our DNA, if you like, where it's almost not possible to have those big progressions without that, unfortunately.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the part that makes me the saddest, which is why I'm trying to be such a loud voice for this, is it's always the most vulnerable who suffer the worst.
Mm.
And I hate that. I hate that because it's not going to be the Sam Altmans and the Elon Musks and the, Mo Gaudats. They're not going to be the ones who get completely ripped to shreds in this experiment. It's going to be the weak and the vulnerable and the poor who get completely blindsided by this. And that's the part that, if it was the people who created the technology, and we've especially now reached this age where power and accountability, we've almost kind of completely disconnected them. It's like, I can create this thing that could destroy all of humanity. And if it goes wrong, it's not my fault. I'll get a book deal and a podcast and I'll go off and make oodles of money talking about, we really shouldn't have done this. I'll go on a book tour telling everybody how I created the thing that's going to destroy us. And it's like, what? If that's what you're going to do, then you should be held fully accountable for the consequences of that. And I think that's some of what is largely contributing to some of the problems we have right now.
Yeah. Yeah. I suppose also to bring it back into the question of what can we do? I'm always a big kind of fan of the Stoic, sort of view on things, which is, focusing on the things that I can control rather than not. And that's certainly, I think, the basis of, what it means to have a humble mind.
Yep.
With that in mind, then maybe we can talk a bit about leadership, because
sure.
You work a lot with leaders, and I'd imagine a lot of the time your work with them involves these kinds of conversations where you're getting them to just think clearly and deeply, perhaps in a space that they don't have elsewhere, so that they can think through these kinds of questions and the long-term ramifications that might have on their business, on their culture, on their people. What are some of the questions that they're asking that you kind of encounter often, and how do you sort of counsel them when it comes to how to make them think more intentionally about, the responsible choices they can make, and, putting in some safeguards, or at least putting in some thinking into how these ripple effects go outwards?
So I think, going back to that, because you can start to think about all this stuff. And this is where I often joke in my podcast and thing. I'm like, I don't want to make people like lose sleep at night and lay in bed and go, oh my gosh, this is just the end, because it can sometimes. You can go down that rabbit trail where pretty soon you're like, we're effed. Like this is just it. Because I also see a lot of beauty and wonder and just awesome stuff happening. And so, going back to the leaders thing, I get asked and I talk to a lot of people who are like, so what do I do? Do I just like throw in the towel and go, if this is the world we live in, if this is the systems that we operate by, like, do I just give into it? And I'm always like, no, you can actually be, even in your little sphere, like an incredible agent of change. And to think that, but it doesn't matter, does it? It's like, no, that's not true. And, as a leader, you can be the one that makes people go, maybe if I make a difference, I can do something. And you can in your world. And I think of, times when I've been with my teams and people who have worked for me, I hope they would say this, but I think they would say, if you work for Christopher, he doesn't follow these rules that the system says you have to do, despite the fact that the system will tell you, well, if you don't, everything's going to collapse. I would always coach the people on my team to be the best version of themselves, even if that meant you need to go do something else. And even if I have to help you do that, then so be it. And I'm going to lower myself so that you can be lifted up. And people are like, wait, that's not what the system says. The system says you elevate yourself on the backs of the people that you work underneath. And it's like, no, you don't have to. And I don't think I fully realized how big of an impact that even I could have until I left Chen Med, left, whatever, because the thing is, the system will want to spit you out, when you do that. And that's one of the games that you play is you go against the system doesn't like it. And there will be times, I've been kicked in the teeth more times than I can count. But to me, it's like, yeah, but it's worth it. Because if I can inspire change in even one person and that person goes on to do something better, then isn't that really what it's all about? Right. Isn't that purpose to feel like what you did mattered beyond just the navel gazing that we often do?
Mm.
And I didn't really even fully realize until I left and some of the people on my team went, I had no idea how big of an impact you made until you weren't here. And that was a very humbling moment, to have people go, my life was better as a result of you in it. And you go, whoa, like what? Like, really? And seeing how that has an impact on the way people show up at work, the way they go home to work, the way they show up with their kids. I mean, I had one person who was working for me that left without a job. And I remember going, and he was so happy when he told me about it. And part of me was like, he goes, the way you led, you cared about your kids and your family. And you always talked about growing up in a funeral home and how you knew that your time here was, yeah, I grew up in a funeral home.
Wow.
So being surrounded by death all the time is largely why I talk the way I do, because I'm like, I know tomorrow's not guaranteed. And I know because I saw it on repeat my entire childhood where people were tragically taken decades before they thought, oh, I'll do this when I'm older. Well, you might not make it there. So are you really sure you want to kick that down the road? But anyway, this leader of mine's like, so I quit because I saw the way you led and you just boldly led even when your job was eliminated and you went off. And I want to be there for my kids and I don't want to participate in this. And of course, my initial reaction is like, whoa, like, hey, I mean, I don't want you like losing your job or just quitting and throwing caution to the wind. And he's like, no. Like I thought it through and I'm like, okay, good. Because I don't need to get like emails from my podcast or just the way I do things going, yeah, I quit my job. And like, I'm living on the street. It's not going so well, Christopher. But he said, no, it wasn't. But I just wanted to follow your lead because I think there are things that matter more than what it was, than what I always thought mattered.
Yeah.
And it's worked out really well for him. And so my point from that isn't, hey, everybody, just quit your job if you're miserable, it'll work out. But it was incredible to see him go, you know what? I've got little kids and they're going to grow up and that's more important. And so I have to be uncomfortable a little bit for their benefit. That to me was so humbling to go, good for you, because we all can make those choices in our day-to-day life. We all can make those choices. And we all know on the inside, we know when we make the one that we go, I know I really shouldn't, but I'm going to, because like, what's the harm anyway? And it's like, well, man, if we can just maybe go, let's all just fight against that a little bit more than we are today. The ripple effect of that is massive.
It reminds me of something that I think you posted today or maybe yesterday around purpose, and sort of allowing a purpose and the voice of your own purpose to sort of inform the decisions that you make rather than being stuck only in option A or B, because I've got to do this. So there's a perceived weight on my shoulders and now, okay, I'm stuck. I'm locked into this and I don't really have the freedom of choice and I'm not able to act in accordance with my purpose. But the reason I also said that is because, just from your post, you said one of your predictions for 2025 is an exponential rise in the number of people desperately seeking purpose in a changing and uncertain world. One of the biggest risks I'm seeing with that trend paired with the rise of AI is the promises technology is making to fulfill people's desire for purpose. That's interesting.
Yes.
And maybe worth its own podcast episode, but I've certainly seen that as well. Certainly in
Mhm.
content and the voices around me and the kinds of books that, and
I mean, the marketing
stuff that I've
everywhere
seen.
is telling
Yeah.
you this is what's going to make you happy.
Yeah. At the same time, there is something that is right about that conversation, or at least it's the kind of conversation we need to be having about having
Yes.
the exploration of our purpose in the front and center, in the public view, or at least in something which is not like, that I keep in my diary, which no one gets to see and it's my secret forever, but rather
Right.
like it's okay to be talking explicitly about it, and it's okay to be on that open, honest journey of trying to find out what that purpose is. I've had my own
and it's okay
experience
if you don't know what it is yet.
purpose. So, yeah, exactly.
It's okay. Like, but you need to be thinking about that. And I think that's one of the big shifts coming out of the Industrial Revolution that is new for a lot of folks, is that, we kind of saw like our personal life as this separate, compartmentalized thing that we actually were discouraged to think about purpose. It was like, just shut up, show up, put in your 8 and go home. And if you want to have purpose, fine, get a hobby or, do something else. And now it's like, we live in a world where our lives are so fully integrated. It's like, you can't do that anymore. And that's why now is the time to go, well, look, like maybe you don't have all the answers. I don't either, but wouldn't you rather be thinking about them? So at least this journey you're on, you can go, I at least put some thought into it.
Well, I mean,
I'm at least where I'm going because I thought about it, not because I was carried here by some existential force.
It's also something that I think as the younger generations come in. I mean, I'm a millennial, but certainly with Gen Zs, it's such a strong defining factor in the work choices that they make, what they study, the partners they take on, where they end up working, what they do with their lives. Whereas, like you said, maybe 30, 40 years ago, it was like, doesn't matter what my purpose is. I got to go to work today. Sorry, I got bills to pay. But it's just so interesting how that cultural shift has taken place, where, and I think rightly so, where a lot of young people are really weighing up their options through the lens of their own purpose or through the lens of the values that matter to them. But it also makes the rest of the world around them a little tougher to sort of kind of orientate then, because it means then that a lot of these structures are not going to be fit for purpose anymore, because we can't depend on a great workforce coming in and taking up all those jobs and paying for everyone's pensions, because it has those massive ripple effects, doesn't it?
Yeah. Well, and I think that's what's kind of, it's been funny to watch. I probably spend too much time just like watching what's going on and just thinking about it.
You probably do.
It was really interesting watching, what happened at the pandemic, because, the whole corporate sphere kind of unwillingly bought into this idea that, I guess we have to just care for and enable and trust our employees because we got no other choice.
Yeah.
It was like, we have to, so we might as well just play along and go with it.
Now. Yeah.
Let's do that now. So, it's all about empowerment and ongoing learning and development and flexibility and all this stuff. And they put on a pretty good front. And now we're starting to see the companies that actually believe that, and the companies that did it as a PR campaign to keep people happy over the couple years, because, oh gosh, we can't have everybody just wipe off the face of the planet or we'll evaporate. Yeah. And now you just see some of this stuff where it's like, we're going to force you back into the office for 5 days a week for absolutely no reason. And we don't even have the space for it, but by gosh, we don't even care. So, and you're just like, wow, okay, you didn't really learn your lesson over the last couple years. And, I see people starting to go, I'm not going to put up with this anymore, which historically that's what happens. Eventually the serfs revolt and they tear down the system. I don't know. It's going to be wild to see.
It's almost as if working 5 days a week in an office feels like an anachronism. It's like, it's like people wearing wristwatches. Sorry if anyone listening, wears a wristwatch, but I mean, I don't, or, as if you were carrying around a Walkman or a CD player. It's just, we don't do that anymore.
Right. Or if you do, it's because it's almost this countercultural,
Yeah,
like
it carries a different meaning.
middle finger to the man. Like, yeah, I still wear a watch the old fashioned way because that's the cool thing to do because I'm a hipster, you know, and you're like, it doesn't,
Yeah.
I don't need it, but I like it. And you're like, oh, okay. And that's where I am with The Office. It's like, okay, if you like love going into the office because
Yeah.
ping pong and pool parties are fun, like, I mean, whatever, but
Yeah.
don't tell me it's because it's actually the best way to get work done. Like,
Yeah.
just do it ironically.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Offices, how quaint. Yeah, exactly. I want to, I want to for a moment just look at sort of human skills, specifically
Sure.
the value of creativity and curiosity. Now, this is
Yeah.
such a great kind of passion and interest area of mine. It's a big focus of the community of Humble Mind as well, and I'm always looking for new and different and interesting voices on these kinds of things because I
Sure.
feel like there's also an industry that exists to sort of say the same 3 or 4 or 5 kind of cue card type things about creativity and curiosity, right? You know, what smart consultants and speakers often give us, you know, you'll never be replaced by someone who uses AI, but rather, you know, it's going to be the things that they can't replicate. And that's why you need creativity and, you know, staying curious about the future. Da, da, da. So I'm wondering if you have, you know, a viewpoint on that, whether it's the value of creativity or curiosity, but also what are some of the barriers that might be in front of us, specifically leaders, let's say, from being able to foster that climate of creativity and curiosity within their teams, because it's often that, isn't it? It's a sort of a vibe. It's an environmental condition, being able to be creative or be able to, you know, allow that to emerge.
Yeah, you know, and so it's funny because I'll hear people say like sound bites of mine over the years, and one of the things that I always find entertaining is I'm like, you know, you talk to me this week. If you quote me last week, I'm probably going to go, not what I'd say anymore type of thing. But also, I think some of these things aren't helpful. You know, where I'll hear things like, you know, AI is not coming for your job. Somebody who uses AI is coming for your job. And it's like, maybe
that's a popular one. Yeah.
Or maybe AI is coming for your job because your job is pointless. And that is the reality. I mean, there were people who operated switchboards at some point and people who lit lamps with actual flames at one point. And guess what? Technology came for their jobs, and there's not a whole lot of even ironic typewriter repair people anymore. Like it doesn't exist anymore. And that's a hard message to hear because we like to think, no, but what I do is really unique. The way I fill out the Excel spreadsheet, nobody does it like I do. And it's like, AI can do it better. And I remember this was a journey I was on, man, even back in my GE days, where I would talk to some of my design team and go, yeah, I mean, I've got an algorithm that can design things better than you can. And they're like, well, what? But the way I design things is so dynamically unique. And I'm like, no, it's not. And I think one of the challenges is we use words like creativity, problem solving, but we never really define them.
Totally.
And so we get locked into our definition of what that looks like. And then we think that's the magic sauce. And I'm involved in Substack a lot, especially more recently. And I grew up, my biological mom was, you know, very artistic and theatrical. And so I'm very familiar with that community. And like, I'll see these things where it's like, oh, you know, writing is a lost art and AI can't touch it. True writing is whatever. And I'm like, if you think magically just putting words to paper is what's magic, AI is going to eat your lunch because there are things about it that are not that unique. But that shouldn't be a threat because it really isn't the sheer typing words into a document that is what's unique about humans. It's the way we go about it. It's the way we pull that together. It's the thought behind that no matter how much, you know, Sam can say we're like, oh, we're going to hit AGI this year, ASI this year. And you're like, yeah, I don't really care. It's never going to have that imago Dei is the word I use. We can't put that in a machine.
Mm.
And so I think that's where, it's like, yeah, you do need to think differently about it. And, when I've worked with people, I'm like, but what is it really that you do? And how can machines help make you do more of that?
Mm.
Because that, I think, actually opens up opportunity. But that's the risk right now, is that you can get locked into the way you do things. And it's like, I mean, I say everyone's going to lose their job as they know it.
Yes.
Everyone's going to lose their job as they know it. And so if you're holding on to your job as you know it today, you're exponentially more at risk because you're not going to see it coming.
You've prompted something, just as you were saying, in that maybe the kind of the real value of those traits like creativity and curiosity, which really are, important and valuable commodities.
Sure.
Perhaps they're more emergent from a particular situation rather than these kind of things that, descend from heaven. And what I mean by that is, if you're saying to someone in 12 months' time, your job filling out these cells in this spreadsheet is not going to matter anymore. It's not so much about you now need creativity and curiosity to keep your job. It's not that. It's rather that if you're able to think broadly and in a non-linear sense about where else you can add value, either in your role in the organization or maybe in your life, maybe you start another business, the results of this interaction of me letting you know that you're going to lose your job now puts you on a different wavelength where you're going to have to embrace other sides of yourself, other gifts, other talents, where thinking creatively, being curious about what you can do and how else you can be adding value in some way is now going to emerge, which is probably, if you follow it right down to its eventual conclusion, is going to allow you to then find a new job or find another place in the organization.
Exactly.
Or maybe start a new business. Great. That's because you embraced, something in a creative way, in a curious, following your curiosity, rather than like, I can put that on my CV. I am a curious person. There we go. Can I keep my Excel
right?
job,
Because it
please?
doesn't mean anything just by it's like you can throw creativity, like I'm creative. That doesn't tell me anything about you.
Yeah.
But I think, this goes back to something we were talking before about this purpose piece that has always been a tragedy to me that I've seen no matter what level of an organization I've been in. So this isn't like a knock on any level, because I see it all the way up to the C-suite, where you'll be in a room and you'll be talking to somebody about something they want to do or they're planning on doing or they're working on. And you'll just ask the question, why are you doing that? And it just gets like eerily silent, like, what? Mm. And you're like, I mean, why? What are you hoping to accomplish with this? Or where does this go? And it's like, we wouldn't be working on this if it wasn't important. And people get really defensive. They get really defensive about it. I'm like, whoa. Like, hey, I'm not saying you're stupid or I'm not saying it's the wrong path. I'm just asking, have we thought about why? And tragically, so often we go through life without ever asking that question. And we go through our days at work and we do all this stuff. And it's like, why am I even doing what I'm doing? And could I be doing something different? Is there something better that I could be spending my time on? Is there a better way to do it? We just don't ask those questions. And I think that is probably the greatest threat to us right now. I mean, on the big level and on the small level is if we're not asking why and where is this going? And is there something different I could be doing? That's, I think, what makes you extremely vulnerable right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And once again, not necessarily, AI or machines destroying the world, but our own lack of curiosity or maybe ingenuity that really is actually available to us in some way. But it's that we've not positioned ourselves in the right way, or we're not taking the best perspective on it. And so that never gets unlocked. And so
here's a good example. Here's a good example of this. I have a friend and he would laugh with me now about it because I kind of ribbed him a little bit, because I was like, well, did you not see this coming? He's a writer and he was working for a marketing. He was working in the marketing group and he wrote the company's blogs. and you can probably guess where this story's going. He wrote the blog once a month, and that was his thing. And so he wrote every month, he wrote a blog and all this stuff. And he got laid off recently because of AI. And they weren't even embarrassed by it. They're like, yeah, you know what? We can pump out 6 articles a week, now with AI, and we don't need you to do it. And at first, I remember when he called me and he, was in a really rough spot. And I empathize with him because I'm like, that sucks. Like, regardless of whether you should have seen it, you can hindsight's always 2020, but so I was there for him through it. And then we kind of went through the same exercise where I'm like, yeah, but why were you even doing what you were doing? You hated what you did. You literally hated it because you were like, they didn't let you express your creativity. You were a machine. They told you what to say and you packaged it into, whatever words, and you pumped it out once a month. And literally your job had become a machine. Mm. So is it any surprise that you can't be a machine better than a machine? Mm. You just can't. And so is it a surprise that once your job had been distilled down to a machine, that a machine would come in and do your job? And so he had to go through this kind of exercise of going, you know what is it? And he's doing great now. He's doing great because he really rediscovered what it was about writing that made him great. And, it's not that, everybody needs to freelance and, sit in a beanbag and find their purpose. Like, no, but he was able to rediscover what it was that he loved about the work he did. And he's on doing wonderful things now. But I think, it's kind of one of those stories where I see people who are like, yep, and I grew up in the L&D industry and I see it all the time. People are like, well, I make learning content. And you're like, I mean, you shell out learning content because somebody tells you make a course. And so you do it and you just do it on repeat.
Cog in the wheel. Yeah.
You're a cog in the wheel and you don't think that the machine's going to come eat your lunch. It's like, it's going to, but it doesn't have to. And I think that's where we are. So
Sarah, you got a question?
I do. Christopher, I'm spending quite a lot of time in the field of Gen Z and the impact of AI, generative AI, on entry-level roles.
Yeah.
And I'd be curious to, I think your point around the holy, if we fast forward this in the Oppenheimer movie, which I watched a few days ago, actually, do we really realize what we're doing? And in your conversations, what are you hearing and what do you think about what we should do to protect what I would call the apprenticeship with a small a? Yeah. So not old school apprenticeship, but rather those roles that the reps that they give us make us mature and better business people as we grow up. What do you think we should be doing about that?
So, and I think this is one of the things where I was advising a company recently on this, where they were kind of going through this journey and they were like, so do we set up an apprenticeship program? Do we do something where we try and do this? And what I said is I was like, I don't think AI is your problem. Because I think, again, you have a lot of people who, if you ask them, why do you do what you do? They couldn't answer that question. They just go through the motions. And really, the beauty of apprenticeship is you have someone who understands their craft and is explaining the why behind it. What is it that, not just how do you do it? Because we don't need that. We don't need to just be able to tell the next generation, here, the widget goes in slot B and just put that thing. They need people to help them go, yeah, but why? Why did we do that in the first place? And where does that go? And why did we even think about that? And I think that's where the first step is actually challenging the generation that's out there today to start doing some of this why work, because that's actually going to then help inform and challenge the next generation to go, okay, well, now this AI thing is here, but now that I understand why we're doing it, maybe we can radically rethink the how, because we've got this new generation of people coming in going, well, that's a stupid way to do it. I think we could do it this way. And I think that's actually where a lot of the work I end up doing is actually helping companies break down well, why are you really doing this? Because if you can do that, you can actually invite the younger generation in to go, yeah, maybe the way we're doing it now is going to be radically different in 6 months. But if you can understand what we're really trying to accomplish and why did we do the things we do, they can actually participate in that journey. And some of the companies that I'm working with that are doing a phenomenal job, they're actually including, just like an apprenticeship, they're including this younger generation in with a humble mind, which I'm sure this community will especially appreciate, of what do you have to teach us about this based on your own experience? And I actually think there's a lot of room in companies for that right now, because there's a lot of really brilliant young whippersnappers.
Yeah,
I think I'm at an age where I can say
100%
that.
agree. And I would say that ask is really scary for a lot of young people. And I don't think
It
we
is.
really realize how,
No.
of course, you've got your, valedictorian, used to doing that stuff, graduate top of their class, whatever. And our educational system, pretty much regardless of where you sit in the world, is not at all
It's not preparing people for this.
supportive and preparing. I was just actually scanning the WEF jobs report. Resilience, flexibility, and agility is number 5 on the top, however many list of skills. And I was thinking, wonder how we're getting a hold of that, because I'm not seeing that in a lot of schools or universities.
Not a lot of
that I
MBA programs.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I think the part that's encouraging to me is the younger generation, at least my experience has been, one of the things that always works well for them is they're usually some of the most resilient and adaptable, because they have no choice but to be. And they're at that season in their life where they can be a little bit more. But yeah, I think some of the work we have to do right now as organizations is I do think we can't rely on the education system to do it. I think, like I said, some of the programs that I've worked with organizations on is, first, they've got to crack the why. They've got to crack the why. Yeah. And they've got to think about the work. And why is this work being done? And how is it being done? And why is it being done the way it is? And if you can do that, you can start to bring those younger generations in to go, like, let's bring you into that process. Let's invite you into some of those discussions. And that's the thing. A lot of times these conversations are happening often like boardrooms, locked doors, all this other stuff. With the technology we have, it's like, why don't you just invite these younger people in to listen to the conversation
Absolutely.
and participate and say, I don't know, anybody got any thoughts on that? Like, here's where we are. Is anybody experiencing? But again, it's counterintuitive, because we feel like, well, that makes us weak. If we go to the next generation and go, we don't have all the answers, they're going to think we're dumb old fogies and they're not going to respect us. And it's like, when has that ever been true?
It's such an important point you're making, because it underscores the value of vulnerability, and being able to do that at an organizational level, at this level that we're talking about. When you're able to see the leaders of a business who are older than you, who have more experience, but they're being vulnerable, I suppose, or open with the fact that they can honestly say, look, we're still kind of figuring this out, and we're not sure where to go, but we do know that it needs to include your voice, and it needs to include,
because we're building a company you're going to have to run.
Yeah, exactly. There's a generational element here. So it makes sense that there would be a consensus that includes you. But rather, it reminds me of that, quote, the thinking that created the problem is not going to be what ends up, solving it. So
no, I think in my own journey, part of what I've always enjoyed is, and it's always almost shocking for my teams when I do this, but I'm radically, like, I bend all the rules of this is how you be a good, boss or whatever, because like I love inviting my teams going, here's an impossible challenge I have. And I honestly don't know what to do. I don't know what to do, but I know and I trust you all know the details far better than I do. And there's things I know. And again, I think sometimes people are afraid, well, if we just do this, it's going to be utter chaos and ruin and people are going to usurp our authority. And it's like, no, they won't. They'll respect you even more because they'll respect the value you bring to the conversation. And some of the best ideas I've had have been when I brought my teams together and gone, here's an impossible challenge. There are things I know. There are conversations that I'm responsible for. There's things we'll be held accountable to. And I will do my best to try and steer and facilitate that. But you know how the work gets done. You know what's actually going on. Help me think through what is the best way. And being honest that, you know what, I can't take all of your ideas. I might have to say no to good ideas. There might be times that we have to go in a way that you might not agree with. But it's not going to be because I don't care or I didn't think about you or include your thoughts in this. Yeah. It might be because there's other things, and I'll be open and honest about the journey we're on. And honestly, every time I've done this, I have wildly outperformed any expectation that I would have ever had. And sometimes the quietest, least likely voice in the room has the best idea that makes me go, holy crap. Like, how did I not think of that? And they're like, I don't know. Like, I just, this came to my head. And you're like, thank you. But again, it's counterintuitive. We've got a bunch of smart people at the top of the chain who don't want to tell anybody that I don't have all the answers, and I'm not going to say anything until we figure it out. And that is the absolute worst thing you can do right now.
I'm so glad we're talking about this, because this is such a sort of big area of interest and passion for me as well, being able to kind of tap into the wisdom of a sort of a tight-knit group. You can call it a community, you can call it a focus group, but you know, when people are kind of matched at a sort of an intelligence level, but the way forward isn't clear, but that's seen as an opportunity rather than something that holds everybody back, because then it allows, especially when you invite, and there's a beautiful quote by a philosopher poet that I love and follow. His name is David White. And he says that leadership is invitation. And all great leadership is invitation, because it's about allowing you to emerge with your thoughts to help to, you know, contribute to the whole, rather than let me tell you what you need to be doing, which is the exact opposite of what's needed, and the breaking of that mindset we've been talking about. But it's just beautiful to see how the knowledge and the answers that we need emerge as a result of that invitation. And the invitation starts by you saying, look, I don't have the answers. I'm going to be vulnerable here. Let's work on it together. And then we'll find out what those are. We'll spot what the connections are between the dots once we can all get on that same page, but we can't do it before.
No. And what's a very personal example of this that, you know, it again, just shows a little bit of like how off the charts I am on some of this stuff. You know, when I lost my job, it's terrifying. It's terrifying. You know, people assume, you know, oh, Christopher, you got all these followers and all this stuff. Like, I'm sure you didn't even think twice about it. It's like, are you kidding? Like, I was mortified. I have 10 people in my house that all rely on me.
Yeah.
Like, one of the most scary things is to go, and I don't know where I'm going to get paid in the future. And that is extremely scary. And as a dad, everything in me goes, well, you can't talk to your kids about this. Like, you've got to pull it all together. You've got to, you know, put on a strong face. You got to tell them it's all going to be fine, or don't tell them at all until you've got it all figured out. And I did exactly the opposite. My kids are, well, I mean, the 4-month-old didn't contribute much. You know, he was born 3 days after. But, you know, I remember the night I lost my job, sitting upstairs with my kids and going, listen, Daddy lost his job today, and I want you to be part of this journey with me, not to scare you, not to make you be afraid of, you know, whatever. We will figure it out. But I want you to participate in this and be part of the journey daddy's on right now, because ultimately you're on it too, whether you want to be or not.
Yeah.
And they have been some of the greatest sources of encouragement. They've been some of the greatest sources of good ideas. They've been some of the greatest sources of help, even where they're like, well, daddy, what can we do? You know what? And they've picked up video editing and learning creativity in Canva, because they're like, well, maybe we can help come up with ideas. And do I use all of them? Of course not, because some of it is not anything I can use. But it's been a journey that they're on, that they now are actually more confident in where we're going, because they know that they're part of the ride as well. And again, it's one of those, like, you don't do that. You know, you don't tell your kids you lost your job. You don't tell them you don't have the answers. You don't tell them all this. And it's like, I don't know. I do. Yeah. And they seem to be handling it exponentially better, because, you know, I've seen in organizations where leaders think like, oh, if we'll just hide this, people won't know. It's like, people aren't stupid. People are brilliant. They see it.
And they're getting smarter.
Yeah. And they're getting smarter. And you really think you're pulling one over on them? No. So why go through all the effort of trying to put the time and energy into hiding and trying to perfect this without everybody? Just invite people in for the ride.
Yeah. Beautifully said. Thank you for sharing. Maybe one final kind of question or thing to throw at you. Is there any particular area or piece of knowledge, piece of work that you're looking into now, maybe something you're researching? I call it a leading edge. That's kind of my own mental Alex terminology, something that I'm learning about, that I'm interested about, something that holds my curiosity, but I don't quite understand it yet. Or something that you're looking to branch into, something that, you know, holds your attention for the future. Anything that that kind of has your attention right now?
I mean, that list is probably a podcast for the entire day. One of the things, though, that I'm probably spending more time watching right now is where AI is going with healthcare. And not just because of the promise it holds, but the risk it holds. And when I say that, you know, like Apple now is, you know, they're all in. I mean, they've said they're going all in on healthcare. And when Apple makes a move, usually you're like, better be paying attention where this goes. But I've also spent a good chunk of my time in healthcare. And so it's a fascinating juncture of where we'll end up going with healthcare. But the reason it concerns me, and the thing that I want to watch for, ties back to my childhood, in that we are terrified of death. And we go to great lengths to not think about it, to, you know, avoid it, to do all this stuff, because we don't want to think about it, which is ridiculous, because it's like, it's coming for you, whether you like it or not. But I think one of the things that I'm really watching where healthcare is going is, I look at all these AI promises, and, you know, many of them, nobody's thinking they can put their hope in it and it'll be okay. And, you know, like, you know, you're not thinking like Chat GPT itself, like, is going to save my life. But as I think about the promises of healthcare, we're very much going to start stepping into this territory where, you know, I talked to somebody the other day. They're like, if I can just live for 10 more years, I'm convinced I can be immortal. And I'm like, oh, I like,
yeah.
And going back to this, where people are going to get deceived and led astray, and, you know, believe in the hope of things that are going to leave you hanging. It's like, that's one that I'm watching closely, and I'm really interested in, and am going to be spending a lot more time talking about, because I want to help people understand what's real and what's accurate. Yeah. And one of the things, and I'll tell you the second one, but one of the things that Noah Yuval Harari has said that I appreciate so much is, even if we got to a point where healthcare could like, let's say we could download your consciousness and put you in a Terminator body and you could, live on whatever. He's like, we still wouldn't give you immortality. We'd give you amortality because you're always just one step away from something wiping you out. Except now there's that much more to lose because now you've been, conscious as an AI bot for 5,000 years and you get zapped. Like the pressure and the anxiety that would put on you would be exponentially worse. And so the healthcare one is one I'm watching just because I think there's so much risk with people getting sucked into it and believing in this idea that, AI and tech is going to save you from the thing we fear most, which is death.
Yeah.
The second one is similar, but different in that the other thing that we are so desperate for is connection. As people, we desperately want to connect with others. And people are very difficult things to connect with, which is actually some of the beauty in it because we're different and we're frustrating and like you challenge me in ways I wouldn't. And AI offers the promise of that connection without any of the baggage, and I'm watching chatbot addiction skyrocket. And I look at companies like Realbotics, where we're building humans for the purpose, we're building robots for the purpose of replacing human relationships.
Yeah.
And I'm extremely concerned about that because I see people with this connection void and they want to fill it. Yeah. And AI is offering some seemingly very tempting promises that I'm already seeing the data come out on this. I mean, literally youth are self-terminating. It's not going well because again, it's always the vulnerable who get hurt first. And it's the kids right now who are already starting to be addicted and forming relationships with these AI bots. And they think this is what's normal. And I'm like, this is going to lead to utter ruin. And so those are two areas, healthcare and human connection, that I have the most concerns for in the next few years that I want to watch very closely and be a voice for because there's lots of money in it. I mean, for sure. And where there's money, people are going to go after and not ask the questions of, but should we even be doing this? And those are two of the big ones.
It's a beautiful share. Thank you. And it makes so much sense and definitely calls for both curiosity and concern because both of those areas, the promise of immortality or amortality, as well as connection when you want it on tap, really kind of tests the frontiers of what it means to be human at the same time as well, doesn't it? Because in order to do those things, to find love, to find companionship, to extend your life for as long as possible, you're always going to be dealing with some kind of natural barrier of sorts. There's always at some point something that'll slow you down or stop you. And that's just how life works. That's a law of the universe, right? And there are good reasons why those things are there as well, and why we're all ultimately subject to the same forces under the sun. So when you start to position that as a market proposition, hey, not anymore. Now we can escape that. There's an escape velocity here that is possible for you to achieve so that you can live forever, or that you can live to 170, like Brian Johnson. Maybe you followed him, this crazy dude who's trying to extend his life forever. It's admirable and incredible and ingenious in so many ways, but it also feels like it's not completely considered at the same time. I mean, that's just my opinion, but it's just
and I think the thing with it is there are two areas we don't understand very well. And that almost makes it more dangerous because we're playing with something we don't fully understand.
No, not at all.
And so we don't think about the implications of some of this stuff, and it's uncharted territory. And I think about what you said at the very beginning of this. Somebody who uses ChatGPT to help them, have arguments with their spouse. And in some ways, I think that can be done in a really helpful way.
Yes.
Because we suck with words, and we say things we don't need to say, and we say things in a way without considering the other person. And I can see a world where we can go, AI involved in human relationships is evil, and so we don't do it. And you can stick your head in the sand, and you might miss out on the richness of experience because you don't take the time to understand that. On the flip side, you can go, being married really sucks because my spouse doesn't do everything I want. And you know what? If I was just married to an AI bot that just did everything I want, that would be better. And it'd be like, oh, let's not go to that extreme either, because now you're missing out on the richness of human experience. And I think because it's like creativity, it's like, well, we don't know what it means. So we have to go into this carefully and thoughtfully, because if we don't, we're going to give up parts that we should never give up. And we're going to make decisions to do things we should never have decided to do. But we're also going to miss out on opportunities that we could have never experienced had we not explored it. And I think that's where these two areas in particular are of extreme interest for me right now.
Yeah, really, really, really cool. It inspires me to go and do some more research into it as well, and check it out. Because, I think as any time that you've got a market proposition that has to do with something that touches right down deep to our humanity, the whether it's the sexual drive or whether it's companionship, loneliness, connection, like you mentioned, wanting to live forever,
your health.
Yeah, your health, absolutely. It's going to bring opportunities, but also right on the flip side of that, problems and concerns as well, and really, really difficult to navigate, because just like everything else around us, we're seeing that with AI play out in real time. There's no framework, there's no kind of like guidebook or manual on how to have these kinds of conversations. Sure, there might be echoes in history where there's similar sorts of patterns, and you can learn a lot from paying attention to that, definitely. But there sometimes are just exponential points which no one has reached yet. And
we've never had to ask the question, what if you could have a friend who isn't a human being but acts exactly like a human? Like, yeah, maybe we have rhythms and rhymes that we can learn from, but we haven't actually had to ask that question ever before.
Yeah, exactly. Sarah?
Yeah, it struck me that we're using complicated problem-solving techniques against complex problems. You framed it beautifully, Christopher. The whole, but what if you've got a teacher who can now reach kids who will never have a human teacher teaching them X subject? Do we abandon that just because we think human connection through bot is wrong? These are complex issues. And I think, unfortunately, the majority of us are not trained in how to solve complex problems, which tends to be a process and an iterative and a let's learn disciplined experimentation. Lenski and Heifetz would speak on this better than I. But we're trying to solve it in sometimes in a very simple way, right? A yes, no, black, white. And so the sophistication of these issues is just beyond most of us, and not for one person.
No. And I think that's why we need that kind of diverse group of people coming together, and not people who are designing the tech. I mean, yes, we need them in here because they need to be able to say this, but we also need the people doing the job. Going back to the teacher example, it's easy for a school administrator or, an app developer to go, I know what teachers do. And I built one, and it's just as good as what a teacher does. And it's like, you don't know what a teacher does. Like, you don't understand what it's like to be in a classroom and understand the complexity of how that works. Be teaching. And if you just literally build a robot that sits at the front of the room and talks to the students, I was a middle school teacher for a while. Like, that's going to last about 2 minutes before they jailbreak that teacher and things go off the chain, so it's just one of those things where it's like, we always want the easy button. So you're saying no, Christopher, based on what you said, so you're saying no AI teachers? That's not what I said. So you're saying yes. That's not what I said.
Mm-hmm.
It's we need to
It's a both and
investigate.
problem.
It's a both and. It's a both and most people don't want that answer. Do I fire my team and replace them with AI bots, or do I not? Wrong question to be asking.
Yeah. So much of the wisdom is being able to restate or rethink through the question itself rather than the answer. And I mean, that's why, a community space like ours, Humble Mind, exists, so that we can have these sorts of conversations which allow us to think more deeply about the questions rather than just rushing to the, the black or white type of answer, because chances are that doesn't help anyone anyway. But,
No.
but yeah, Chris, I really appreciate your time and everything that you've generously shared with us today. I've loved our conversation, and certainly lots of material to come back to, in future talks, which I hope you'll be open to.
Yeah, for sure. Happy to do it. Happy to do it. This has been fun.
Wonderful. Thanks, man. You rock. Thanks for listening to this episode of Humble Mind. I hope you enjoyed it. If you're curious to take a look at our community, if you're not a member, you're missing out. Make sure you head to humblemind.co to check out more and to see what we're up to. I look forward to seeing you there. Until next time.